Right now, your survival probably depends on a number. A paycheck, a bank balance, a direct deposit notification, a salary hitting your account at the right time. If that number stops showing up, modern life starts closing in fast. Rent, food, electricity, gas, insurance. Everything begins to feel conditional. But for almost all of human history, no one got a paycheck. No salary, no wages, no payroll department, no Friday deposit, no waiting for money to appear before you were allowed to live. And yet humans survived for hundreds of thousands of years. So how? The answer is strange because it forces you to notice something we almost never question. Ancient humans didn't survive without paychecks by being poorer than us. They survived without paychecks because they lived in a world where survival had not yet been turned into something you had to buy back. Let's clear something up first. This doesn't mean prehistoric life was easy. It wasn't. People got injured, winters were hard, droughts happened, hunts failed, children died, danger was real. But difficulty is not the same thing as dependence. That's the part we miss. If you were a hunter-gatherer and you were hungry, you didn't need money to get food. You needed knowledge, you needed tools, you needed people. You needed to know where tubers grew, when fruit ripened, where animals moved, how to make a fire, how to track, how to carry water, how to share. Your survival came from your relationship with the world around you, not from an employer sitting between you and dinner. That changes everything. For most of the 300,000 years humans have existed, people lived in small bands. They hunted, gathered, fished, trapped, scavenged, made tools, repaired shelters, carried children, told stories, and moved with the seasons. No one had a profession in the modern sense. No one said, "I'm in middle management." No one said, "I work in accounts payable." And not even hunter or gatherer really worked as fixed job titles the way we imagine them now. In most groups, people did what had to be done when it had to be done. The work was real, but it wasn't abstract, it wasn't endless, and it usually wasn't separated from life. That's one of the biggest differences. Today, work is a place you go, a block of time you sell, and an identity you explain. Back then, effort was woven directly into survival. You didn't work in order to live later. You did what was needed, and that was life. Anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer societies have been pointing to this for decades. In many cases, people met their basic needs with surprisingly modest amounts of subsistence labor. Some groups spent around 15 to 20 hours a week securing food and essentials. Even where that estimate varies, the broader pattern remains the same. Many foragers had more flexibility and more leisure than people assume. That doesn't mean they were lounging around in some prehistoric spa. It means they were not trapped in permanent, clock-regulated labor. The ACTA in the Philippines offer a revealing example. Communities that remained focused on foraging had more leisure than communities pulled toward farming. Once agriculture entered the picture, work increased, time became more controlled. And women, especially, lost a disproportionate amount of leisure. That's important because it tells you something uncomfortable. The old story says farming was progress because it made life easier. The evidence keeps suggesting something messier. In many cases, it made life more productive, but not necessarily freer. And freedom is what this story is really about. Because before paychecks existed, human security came less from income and more from access. Access to food, access to water, access to land, access to skills, access to people who would not let you starve if you had a bad day. That last one matters more than we usually admit. Hunter-gatherer societies were often built around sharing. If someone made a successful kill, that food was typically distributed. If someone got sick, others helped. If one day went badly, tomorrow was not automatically a private disaster. Your wealth was not a bank account. Your wealth was the group. Your wealth was trust. Your wealth was knowing that survival was collective. And that means the real answer to how did humans survive before paychecks existed is not just they hunted and gathered. It's deeper than that. They survived because life had not yet been organized around individual monetized dependence. The land fed them, yes, but so did reciprocity, so did memory, so did shared obligations, so did belonging. Even childhood looked different inside that world. In hunter-gatherer communities, children often learned by watching, imitating, and playing alongside others. They weren't being prepped for a resume, they were absorbing survival itself. Girls learned plants, digging, childcare, and food preparation through participation. Boys learned tracking, tool use, and eventually hunting through observation and practice. Mixed-age playgroups weren't separate from real life. They were training for it. No one had to ask, what career path will make this child employable? The child was already being folded into the life of the group. Not through lectures, not through schedules, through living. And this is where the story turns, because humans did not always need paychecks, but they also did not always stay hunter-gatherers. Around 12,000 years ago, in several parts of the world, people began farming. At first, that might sound like the obvious upgrade: grow more food, stay in one place, build things, store grain, raise animals, increase security. And in one sense, yes, that worked. Agriculture could support larger populations, but it also introduced a completely different relationship to time, labor, and survival. Foragers work in bursts. Farmers wait, plan, weed, protect, harvest, store, repair, repeat. A hunt can fail and you move on. A field fails and months disappear. And once you settle, you can't just drift somewhere else when conditions change. You've invested labor into land, you've built structures, you've planted futures you now have to defend. The field becomes your responsibility, then your burden, then your prison. This is when survival starts changing shape, because once food can be stored, it can also be counted. If it can be counted, it can be taxed. If it can be taxed, it can be controlled. And if it can be controlled, someone can decide who gets what. That is a massive shift in human life. Before that, most people were embedded in an ecology. After that, more and more people became embedded in systems. Agriculture didn't just produce crops, it produced surplus. Surplus produced ownership. Ownership produced inequality. Inequality produced dependence. And dependence is the ancestor of the paycheck. Not the literal paycheck yet, of course, that comes much later. But the logic begins here. You no longer survive because you can directly meet your needs with your skills and your group. You survive because you occupy a place inside a larger system of storage, exchange, duty, and control. That system may give you grain, it may give you rations, it may give you protection, but it can also take those things away. Skeletons from early farming societies tell part of the story. In many places, bodies show signs of harder lives, narrower diets, more disease, more crowding, more physical stress. Children show markers of repeated illness. People lived closer to waste, closer to animals, closer to one another. Farming grew food, but it also grew vulnerability. So no, the first people who gave up foraging did not simply walk into a better life. They walked into a life that was more organized, more productive, and often more exhausting. That's not the same thing. Then comes specialization. Once societies get larger, not everyone can spend their time finding food directly. Some people make pots. Some weave cloth, some build walls, some keep records, some fight wars, some manage temples, some control storehouses. And specialization sounds efficient, but it has a hidden price. The more specialized you become, the less directly you can survive on your own. A potter cannot eat pottery, a scribe cannot drink accounting, a metalworker cannot swallow a blade. The more complex the system becomes, the more everyone depends on everyone else and eventually on the institutions coordinating them all. Now the distance between effort and survival gets wider, and once that distance exists, power rushes in, because whoever controls land, storage, law, or distribution controls life. That is the real prehistory of the paycheck. The paycheck is just the polished, modern version of an older arrangement. An arrangement where survival is no longer something you do, it becomes something you are granted access to through a system. Then the Industrial Revolution arrives and pushes that logic to its extreme. This is the moment where millions of people stop working mainly with what they can directly use and start selling time itself. That's the real revolution, not just steam engines, not just factories, time for money, hours for wages. Your day divided, measured, purchased, and returned to you in pieces. Factory workers labored 14 to 16 hours a day, 6 days a week. Men, women, and children all worked. The air was filthy, machines were dangerous, cities swelled faster than sanitation systems could handle. Smoke, soot, injury, disease, and if you didn't show up, you didn't eat. That is much closer to the world we know, because by then, survival had been fully detached from direct access. You no longer go to the forest, you go to the factory. You no longer rely on seasonal knowledge, you rely on wages. You no longer rest when the task is done, you stop when the bell says stop. This is when the paycheck becomes more than payment. It becomes permission to buy food, permission to keep shelter, permission to remain inside society without being crushed by it. And that is why losing a paycheck feels so terrifying even now. It's not just about money, it's about the fact that most of us no longer have any direct route to survival outside the system paying us. That's the trade. And for a long time we told ourselves it was worth it. More comfort, more medicine, more stability, more technology, and to be fair, a lot of that is true. Modern life has advantages our ancestors never had. But every advantage came bundled with a psychological cost, because now work is not just effort. It's identity, it's status, it's legitimacy, it's the answer you give when someone asks who you are. What do you do? That question sounds harmless, but hidden inside it is an assumption so deep we barely hear it anymore. What function do you perform in exchange for being allowed to live here? Hunter-gatherers had roles, skills, responsibilities, and obligations, but they did not build their entire sense of self around a job title. They were not introduced to themselves through payroll. We are. And that may be why this question hits so hard. How did humans survive before paychecks existed? Because it sounds like a practical question, but it's really a spiritual one. It forces us to confront the possibility that what we think of as normal is actually very recent. For most of human history, people survived through competence, cooperation, mobility, memory, and direct connection to the material world. Gradually, survival moved farther away, first into farms, then into storehouses, then into kingdoms, then into markets, then into factories, then into bank accounts, and now into digital numbers on a screen. The paycheck didn't create human survival, it replaced older ways of reaching it, sometimes with more safety, often with less freedom. That doesn't mean we can go back, we can't. There is no return to some pure prehistoric life, but that was never the point. The point is to see clearly what changed. Our ancestors were vulnerable to nature, we are vulnerable to systems. They feared drought, injury, winter, and scarcity. We fear missed payments, layoffs, debt, and losing access. They had less comfort, we have less direct control. And maybe that's why so many people today feel exhausted in a way that sleep doesn't fix. Because deep down, the human brain still recognizes something strange about having to ask a system for permission to survive. So how did humans live before paychecks existed? They lived by knowing the world, by depending on one another, by sharing risk, by carrying skills in their bodies instead of outsourcing survival to institutions. They lived without salaries, without direct deposit, without payroll, without needing to monetize every hour of their existence. And maybe the most unsettling part of all is this: for most of human history that wasn't considered primitive, it was just life. The paycheck came later, the dependence came later, the idea that your time belongs to someone else until you've earned enough to buy yourself back came later. We call that civilization, we call it advancement, we call it normal. But if you zoom out across the full span of human history, it is anything but normal. It is new, and maybe that's why so many people, even when they are paid, still feel like something essential has gone missing. Because before paychecks existed, humans didn't just survive. In one crucial sense, they were still closer to owning their time, and we have been trying to buy that time back ever since. If you've ever felt the weight of trading your time just to buy back your survival, share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's talk about it. And if you want to explore more hidden truths about human nature, hit subscribe and join us next time on Pencil Stick.